All right, good morning, everyone. It's so great to see you here this morning. Welcome to day 2 of MIT's Week of Generative AI. In particular, we'd like to welcome you this morning to our symposium on generative AI and education, which is happening here. We'd also like to welcome you to this space, Building 45, the Stephen A. Schwarzman College of Computing. Just a fun fact, this is in fact the first public event taking place in this building. So great. Thanks for that we were able to have this here, and hope that all goes well with the construction. It's a really beautiful space, and we're very happy to be here. My name is Capozzola. I'm MIT's Senior Associate Dean for Open Learning and a Professor of History. And together with my co-organizer, Cynthia, who you'll hear from shortly, MIT's Dean for Digital Learning, we are really excited to convene this conversation together with the Office of the President and so many other sponsors here at MIT. For those of you who don't know, MIT Open Learning is dedicated to a mission of transforming teaching and learning at MIT and around the globe through the innovative use of digital technologies. We have in our ranks and distributed through the faculty expertise in digital education and research-driven teaching and learning. And we are excited and have been very active in meeting the moment of generative AI. As you all know, generative AI is already challenging educators and students to rethink how we teach and learn in the classroom and beyond. We're going to ask some of those questions here today. First, what role could and should generative AI play, both in and beyond the classroom, in supporting effective, engaging, and equitable learning for people of all ages? We're going to explore the possibilities for leveraging these new technologies to improve teaching and learning. We're going to thoughtfully confront the challenges that generative AI poses to academic integrity and the evaluation of student work. We're going to delineate crucial steps needed to ensure greater equity and access as new technologies are widely adopted and regularly refined. And most importantly, we're going to ask, what are the tasks that confront us as educators seeking to equip learners for a world in which generative AI is ubiquitous? Now, to address these questions, we've gathered experts from across MIT, both enthusiasts and critics, builders and theorists, and I'm going to turn it over now to my colleague Cynthia to tell you a little bit more about today's agenda. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. I am so happy to welcome you all here to this amazing event and this fabulous space. I wanted to give you a little bit of kind of the origin story for this event and why we designed it the way that we did. And then I'll talk you a little bit through the agenda in a little more detail. So when Chris and I started to think about how we wanted to frame this particular gathering as part of Generative AI Week, we really wanted to prioritize bringing together our community. So really gathering our vibrant, innovative community of students, staff, and faculty who are actively innovating and exploring how to use generative AI, both in their own learning, in furthering teaching practice, and thinking about how can this become a technology that can actually have the positive change that we aspire it to have, and what are potentially the challenges in making that happen. So it's really a chance for us to network, to become more familiar with what each other is already doing, to build community, to help each other succeed in this really critical aspect of our MIT mission of education. So as Chris mentioned, our panelists bring really deep experience and expertise in AI and education, with applications ranging from K-12 to higher education to workforce. They bring careful consideration, enhancing learning outcomes for diverse students and learning context, both international and domestic, and the responsible use of AI in classrooms and thinking about how we can prepare educators writ large around this, as well as how to really think about diversity and inclusivity in all of this. So we also feature 2 30-minute innovation showcase sessions. So you're not only having the chance to hear from our thoughtful colleagues, but you're actually going to get to see and learn about what is actively being done, to see demos, to play around with it as well. So we think this is going to be a really fun, engaging part of our program. So here's our agenda. Our first session is a fireside chat that is going to really explore innovative technologies when they've succeeded in transformation, and maybe times when they have failed to have the disruptive impact we'd hoped they would, and why. That'll be with Mitch Resnick and Justin Reich, moderated by Philipp Schmidt. Then we'll move on to a panel on reinventing learner experience, covering K-12 to global workforce and higher education. We're going to have faculty, staff, and students participate on that panel. I will be moderating that, and we'll be introducing everyone. At 10:15, we're going to have our first 30-minute innovation showcase. To kick that off, we're going to have half of our innovative demoers give a 1-minute lightning talk, so just that you can have a precursor of what will be out there. All demos will be available for both sessions, but we want to give folks a chance to be able to tell you a little bit about their demos so you can seek them out if there's something you particularly want to look at. We'll have 2 of those. At 10:45, we're going to reconvene to talk about reinventing teaching practice. We're going to cover topics from professional development, pedagogy, classroom instruction, and innovative tools to support this. And then our final panel is what we call our moonshot panel. So provocative ideas about bigger, longer-ranging impact, provocative ideas, and how we imagine a vision, a further-looking vision of how generative AI can reinvent and reimagine how we learn in many different kinds of contexts. In our final showcase, we'll wrap up with another 1-minute set of lightning talks, and then people are free to roam and convene and network. And of course, we're going to give our acknowledgments to all the amazing staff who really helped put this event together. So I will turn this back over to Chris.
All right. So before we get started, just a few words of thanks. And in particular, we want to thank the Office of the President, President Kornbluth, for leading and charging us with this work this week, with several of the other organizing staff from Institute Events and Institute Affairs, who you see noted on the slide. I'd also like to give a special shout out to the planning committee for this organization, or for this morning's events, which includes some of the speakers who will be sort of serving twice, both on the planning committee and as speakers, as well as some of the additional members. And then a special shout out to the staff of the Media Lab and of Open Learning, with one in particular, Steve Nelson. If you're here, wave your hands. He's in the back. And Steve in particular has gone above and beyond in all of this. But really, the thanks, the list of people we could thank is endless, and so I want to just keep things short at this point, and we are actually on time, and we're going to jump right into our very first panel. I'd like to welcome to the stage the panelists, and in particular our moderator, Philipp Schmidt, the Chief Technology Officer of the Axum Collaborative. Thank you.
I'll grab this one. Thank you very much. Is this working? Well, it's wonderful to be here this morning. Thank you for the invitation. Also, thank you for hosting this. What a moment to talk about AI in education. I mean, we say that every week, but it feels like, just given the developments of the last 10 days, maybe even more so right now. And also, I can't think of 2 better people to have a conversation with about this topic this morning. So I'm excited to be here. Just very brief introductions. Justin Reich is an associate professor of digital media in the CMS department. Mitch Resnick is the LIGO Papert professor at the Media Lab and leads the Lifelong Kindergarten group. Both of them have written actually books that are very relevant to this topic, Lifelong Kindergarten, the 4 Ps, and cultivating creativity through projects, passions, peers, and play on Mitch's side. And then recently, both Failure to Disrupt, Why Technology Alone Can't Transform Education, and then Iterate, The Secret to Innovation in Schools, by Justin, which in some ways, when I was looking at the books, I thought, actually, those are the perfect frameworks to use to think about this topic today. So we had a little pre-call and decided that we're going to be doing so much forward-looking. What's happening today? How is it going to affect the future? Might be good to start by also looking backwards a little bit. What can we learn from past waves of innovation? So I want to start with a conversation about kind of where are we coming from? How can we think about what we've seen before to understand what's happening right now? And how can we set the stage and maybe make some adjustments to make sure that the results of this wave of technology really benefits all learners? So maybe I'll start with you, Mitch, and go you, Justin. But just when you think about the link between technology and learning, and maybe actually also you mentioned something about like the MIT view on this. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about some of those past waves and how people have thought about technology and education and how you think that might apply to this moment.
Sure. Thanks, Philip, and it's great to be part of this discussion. And thanks again to the organizers for putting this together and inviting. And I do think that there have been these sort of waves of technologies that ripple through society. And each time there's a new wave of technology, I think we always need to consider how are we going to integrate this into our learning environments? How is it going to affect learning and education? And this happened 40, 50 years ago as personal computers spread through society. It happened 25 years ago as the internet became prevalent through society. And it's happening now with AI and generative AI. And I do think each time we have to think about, how is it that this could be integrated? And I think there are important choices to make as it. It's not something that just is automatic of what's going to happen. And to me, it's really important to consider each time, what is it that we want learning and education? What type of learning and education do we want for our children, for our schools, for our society? And I think that can really guide us. And I think too often people don't go back to that basic framework. They think, what can the technology do? As opposed to, what do we want for learning and education, for children, for schools, for society? I do think my mentor, Seymour Papert, sometimes framed this in terms of two different schools of thought about different approaches to learning and education. He described one as instructionist, and that was, how is it that we can deliver instruction in a more efficient and more effective way? And of course, there's a lot of advantages being more efficient, more effective at how you deliver instruction. And then in another school of thought that he termed constructionist, it was more about how can we engage the learner in designing, creating, experimenting, working on projects based on their interests in collaboration with others, so they develop type of creative skills and curiosity. And you could use technology in either of these ways to support them. And in fact, they have been used in both of those ways. And going back to the early days, as computers first started to get through society 50 or so years ago, you did see these different ways. And this gets a little bit different. Universities took some different approaches. Like the instructionist approach, at least I see it back then, was really Carnegie Mellon became a real pioneer and leader in that they saw that technology could be used to make different types of tutoring systems, and the computer could deliver instruction and do it where based on the responses it could then tailor the next question. So it was a more efficient, effective way to deliver instruction and to assess what the student was learning and guide things appropriately. And here at MIT, led by Seymour and those working with them, took a very different approach. Say, how's this a new type of material that kids can design, experiment, and express themselves with? And there's been a continuing thread at MIT through that. I see in the front row Hal Abelson, who's going to be joining later today, worked with Seymour on the early version of LIGO, and the continuing work on his projects like App Inventor and our own projects with Scratch have sort of tried to continue in some of that tradition. And I do think, maybe just to end this with, the role of AI in this, because it was like in those two approaches, AI got used more strongly in that sort of intelligent tutoring approach. And I do think traditional forms of AI were more sort of easily integrated into that instructionist approach, that it was sort of possible to use it as a type of tutoring system. So it got more adopted that way. And now as I see the next wave of AI with generative AI and sort of this latest wave, a thing that encourages me and makes it, and I think is an interesting opportunity, I do think there are greater possibilities now of using this new wave of technology to support either instructionists or constructionists. So I think there's a lot more that we can make some decisions of how we want to make use of it. So it's encouraging that we have opportunities to use it in different ways. I will, though, say what's discouraging when I look at what's happening in my mind in the ed tech world, most of them, I think, are using this technology just to reinforce traditional approaches to education. So it's discouraging how it's getting out there in the world, in my mind. There's just reinforcing some traditional approaches to education when I think real big changes are needed. But I think there's great opportunity, but also some signs of discouragement and things that, about the way it's actually getting adopted in schools.
Yeah, and maybe as a segue to you, Justin, Mitch's point, there are always, when these new waves appear, there are always these grand pronouncements about how this is fundamentally going to change everything, how it's going to improve everything. And then we often the results end up looking a little bit different, as you point out in your book. So I wonder if you could maybe talk a little bit about some examples from the past, but then also, is this one going to be different, or where do you see this heading?
Yeah, so I was at a conference at Harvard where a fellow named Ethan Mollick, who's been very enthusiastic about AI, was talking about his sort of optimistic views, and he was saying that AI was going to democratize education, that everyone is going to have free access to these kind of personalized tutors, and someone was like, well, weren't MOOCs supposed to democratize education? He's like, oh, no, MOOCs were silly. MOOCs were just a bunch of, you just watch it, like people sitting by themselves watching a bunch of videos. Like, how could that be interesting? And I was thinking, 10 years ago, we were like, well, of course, textbooks weren't going to democratize education. You need these really like carefully made, personalized videos, humanistic videos. That's what was going to transform education. And I'm sure 10 years from now, there's going to be someone sort of watching recordings of Ethan Mollick's talk being like, of course you're not going to transform education with a bunch of kids sitting in front of tutor bots. Like, no one wants to talk to their computer. It doesn't matter how compelling it is. When a kid is sitting down trying to learn algebra or something like that, you can build a great instructional sequence with textbooks. You can build a great instructional sequence with videos. You can build a great instructional sequence with a tutor bot. But none of that matters because the kid doesn't really want to learn algebra. What the kid wants to do is build a relationship with their teacher and the peers around them. Learning is just a fundamentally social enterprise. Now, there are a relatively small portion of people in the world who are pretty good at teaching themselves using anything. Lots of those kinds of people end up at places like MIT. Lots of those people develop the privilege to be able to develop education technologies. But the vast majority of people, when we learn, especially when we learn things that society asks us to learn, not the stuff that we're most passionate about, we really learn it because we're in a social enterprise with other people. I couldn't agree more with Mitch. I was thinking of Seymour Papert's book, Mindstorms, and trying to think, like, go back and read that book, and everywhere it says computer, just replace it with AI and see if it still has a pretty good argument. One of the things that Seymour Papert famously sort of phrased is like, are we going to use computers to program kids, or are we going to have kids program computers? I think you could ask the same question, like, are we going to have AI program kids, or are we going to have kids program AI? That, to me, 40 or 50 years later is still a great question. Maybe the thing that I would add to Mitch's list of sort of fundamental considerations, like especially if you look back at where technology has struggled to make change, is that our existing education systems are complex social technical systems. People have complex brains that learn in certain ways. They learn with other people. Our schools have multiple competing purposes that they're negotiating between about preparing citizens, preparing people for work, providing pastoral care, just supervising kids during the day, things like that. Historically, technologists have not done a great job of understanding those complex social technical systems. So you sort of build stuff for the way you wish students learn as opposed to how they actually learn. You build stuff for the way you wish schools were as opposed to how you actually were. And then these things get dropped into systems and they don't do what we want them to do and they don't work the way that they want them to work. And so really, this is a pitch for Failure Disrupted as a book, and I teach a class in the spring called Learning, Media, and Technology, where the basic thesis is, like, if you don't understand these systems that you're building things for, you're not going to build things that work in those systems.
Yeah, so it's probably a combination of what systems you're building for, and then what do you want young children to grow up as? Mm-hmm. So I think those are sort of two things. To make it work, it has to work in the system, but to go in the direction you want. So you could have things that are transformative, but transformative in a bad direction. I was thinking the title of this is, will it transform learning education? Even if you said yes to that, there's then a question of, is it transforming the direction that we want it to transform it in?
Yeah. And the technologies will not transform it. That I am 100% clear of. Like, if you think you're going to make a thing that you download onto someone's phone and that transform a system, like, I promise you that will not work. When systems change, it is because we partner with educators, we partner with learners, we partner with families, we build their capacity. For a new technology to be actually useful, you often need to change a whole bunch of other things. Like, if you're like, I made the best possible technology for project-based learning, well, then you need a new curriculum, and then you need new professional development. You need actually a different kind of schedule because you can't do that kind of learning in the sort of class periods that we have in most places. So there's a whole bunch of other parts of this system that have to change. And organizations, like the Lifelong Kindergarten Lab, like other places that are really good at building technologies that actually have the capacity to make changes in how learning happens. It's not just about building this thing and downloading it on people's phones or their tablets or whatever else it is. It's about helping those organizations make the kind of systemic change. You know, a new technology is only as powerful as the community that guides their use. And so thinking about how those communities change is a central part of anything that will look like transformative. I mean, you know, or even just, you know, it's also fine not to transform education. It's also fine to have like iterative improvements that sort of systematically, you know, in small ways over time accumulate to make things better. My colleague Ken Kadinger, who's at CMU, says that step change is what 25 years of incremental change looks like from a distance.
Is it okay for us to keep ripping on each other?
The easiest moderation job I've ever had.
Yeah, but one thing that's come to mind is that another thing that might be a little different now, it's not the technology, but the way the world is right now might require some different types of things. We have a greater recognition. Because in some ways, to me, when I was sort of laying out sort of this, what Seymour called a constructionist approach, to me it feels it's more needed now than ever, partly because of advances in AI and many other things. I think everyone would agree that the world is, you know, changing more rapidly than ever before, that kids are growing up and there's going to be, you know, a never-ending stream of unknown and uncertain and unpredictable things. And the proliferation of AI systems and tools is just going to speed it up more and add to more disruptions. So it's even more important than ever for young people to grow up with the ability to deal with the unexpected things that arise in their lives. So it'll be more important than ever for them to develop as creative thinkers, to be able to come up with innovative solutions. And so I do think that a lot of traditional approach to schooling, which was really about helping learn particular concepts and particular skills, is less relevant today. Although, I mean, some of those might be important as part of the picture of what you're doing, but it's so important to make sure that young people grow up as sort of creative, curious, you know, collaborative thinkers in a fast-changing, complex world that's becoming even more complex and fast-changing because of AI. So it's not just what AI can bring as a tool, but how it's affecting society leads us to say children to grow up to be successful in the workplace and in society as citizens will need to develop these types of, become more creative, curious, collaborative in order to succeed, which I think are some of the goals of this approach of trying to enable kids to create, design, collaborate, work on projects based on interests is towards that. So it feels more important now than ever to keep a focus there.
I wonder, yeah, I mean, I think there's, how does the education system make sense of this moment, and how, we've talked a little bit about how do the technologists make sense of this moment, why building an app may not, although Okta Studio is an app, so why building an app may not be enough to really transform education. But I wonder, Justin, I know you talk a lot to leaders in the K-12 systems. What's the response for them? What are the questions they're asking right now? What are the concerns, and how do you respond to that?
Probably like faculty here, lots of other places, the number one entry point that school staff are currently encountering AI with is described as cheating. That is other things they could actually take a couple of years to figure out for like how should AI change the way we teach social studies? How should AI change the way we teach earth science? Like if we didn't figure that out until 2027, like we'd be fine. But actually this year, school superintendents, school boards, school leaders need to figure out like what are we going to do about the fact that actually I was joking with them, to school board members. If you were a school board member elected in 2019, you had the pandemic in 2020, and then you had actually a year in most schools that was harder than the pandemic in 2021, 2022, when all the kids came back super angry, and they weren't really sure why they were angry, but they were angry at whoever nearby that happened to be teachers. And then Silicon Valley invented this machine that can do all of the kids' homework for them. It's like give me a break, can we cut us some slack here? So that is the most urgent concern. I've encouraged school leaders to stop thinking about it as a cheating problem and think about a problem as bypassing useful cognition. Like we had invented a bunch of exercises as teachers that are useful for helping young people develop certain skills and proficiencies and content knowledge and things like that. And then we invented this machine that can do most of those can do many of those kinds of things for them, especially in writing. However, over the last 50 years, maybe 100 years, we've done that all the time. It used to be a great idea to ask people to summarize lots of things, and then we invented encyclopedias. It used to be a good idea to ask them to compute math problems, and then we invented calculators. It used to be a good idea to ask them to translate documents from one language to another, and then we invented Google Translate. So schools have basically faced for decades tools that let people bypass useful cognition. And schools then have to figure out, like, okay, so what of that do we not need to do anymore? Like, what are the kinds kinds of, I don't know, a student was telling me the other day, I guess it was a year ago, that I was like, what are you using ChatGPT for? And they were like, to format LaTeX in my papers. I was like, great, never think about that again. Just like if a machine can do that for you, that is not useful cognition. But there are other kinds of things, you know, where we're asking students to write, not just to generate a document, but because writing is thinking. And bypassing that process may be bypassing useful cognition. So we're gonna have to go back, you know, math teachers figured out pretty quickly that like you can't ban these technologies. Banning calculators was a bad idea. They also figured out that there were times when walling these things off was quite good, to say like, actually, you should be able to do this without a calculator because you won't be able to do later kinds of math thinking if you don't have some automaticity with these sorts of skills. So for this part of the lesson, the week, the homework, or whatever, don't use those tools, and then we'll figure out where to bring them in later. That's the most urgent thing that I think school leaders are working on, and I'm sure that there are ways that we could help them think through those kinds of challenges. A big part of that will just be continuing to think of like, what are interesting ways to have people do useful cognition that can't be bypassed with ChatGPT. If there's anything we need to figure out, how do you do useful cognition, you know, without using Google, without using Spark Notes, without using calculators, all these kinds of things. You know, and then I think the next thing they have to figure out is like, well, how should their schools change based on like, what should we be teaching differently? You know, Mitch pointed to one sort of thing, which is that a lot of what effective schools do is they help young people build capacities where we have comparative advantages over computers. That was work that like, you know, Frank Levy did here in the economics department, David Autor did in the economics department, Richard Murnane over at Harvard said, like, if a computer is good at a thing, then probably, you know, think carefully about whether you want to spend a lot of time teaching humans to do that thing, because they probably can't get a lot of work doing that. However, there's lots of things that computers and AI maybe are not going to be as good at, and we should figure out what those things are and really try to emphasize skill development in those areas. And Mitch gave, I think, a pretty good list of what some of those kinds of things are. The other thing is for schools to think about is, you know, I think over the last 40 years, as there have been technological changes, a pretty good question to ask is, how are the disciplines changing, and how should that change our instruction? You know, I was a high school history teacher in 2003 when the world's archives and governments were digitizing every primary source document they could find. And the field of history was changing rapidly, and so our instruction as history teachers changed to incorporate many more diverse primary sources in our instruction, at least in places that I think did that well. You know, so we could start asking questions in schools like, what fields seem to be changing fastest with generative AI? You know, it strikes me that most software engineers in the next couple of years won't do any programming without some kind of copilot, that will just become a completely normal part of instruction. So if 3 years from now, the way we taught people to code always had a little copilot helping them, that seemed like a good way maybe to follow what the disciplines are doing. You know, if you're teaching a 12th grade career technology education class in design, you know, the field of design is changing incredibly rapidly because of generative AI. And if you're not teaching some of those skills, even if you don't totally understand them yourselves, you're probably not preparing young people for that world. On the other hand, there's going to be other disciplines, you know, poetry, memoir, social studies. You know, when I taught U.S. history, I was seeing out in the hall that there was a whole lot of emphasis on sort of personalized education. When I taught history, there was very little that needed to be personalized. What I wanted to do was have young people with very different minds look together at the same time at really important primary sources. There's very little that personalization helps with that. Like, I don't need kids moving at their own speeds, or I actually need them at the exact same place at the same time, thinking and talking with each other about the same thing, because that's how we build the skills for deliberative democracy. So thinking about how the disciplines are changing can help us think about how schools should change.
Before I get to you, Mitch, just reminds me of this fantastic quote that I think Chris Capozzola shared with me some time ago about writing at MIT. And I don't know who actually said this originally, but it's something along the lines of the creation of text is incidental to the teaching of writing at MIT. I thought there's such a great way of thinking about writing, as it's a muscle we develop, or it's a skill we develop that actually represents critical thinking, persuasion, understanding the world around us. Like, these are all those important things. And writing is beautiful and is an important skill, but it is kind of just one manifestation of these other things that we hope people develop. And so it strikes me as a good example of rethinking how we're approaching this teaching and disciplines now that technology comes in. But I know you want to get in, and also I wonder if it's related to what you just shared with us before we went on stage, this response from the education sector from another country that you mentioned. I wonder if that's maybe there's an openness there or an interest there to engage with this in a way that is now created by this new technology.
But let me start with first, just to reinforce something that Justin was saying, was I really liked when you talked about how it becomes even more important to help young people develop the things that machines aren't necessarily so good at. And see, this is a great opportunity for us to sort of focus more on what makes us most human. The ability to think creatively, to engage empathetically, to work collaboratively. Because I do think those are special things that are really important and will be important things for young people to develop, but also for educators and teachers to really lean in on those things that are most special. Because I do think there are a lot of things that human teachers are especially good at. As you mentioned earlier, the social side of forming relationships, relating to lived experiences, creating a caring community. Those are things I don't see generative AI playing big role. And I do think that leaning in to make sure that educators have the opportunity to develop those skills. And it's one reason that I get really frustrated with the way things get positioned with a lot of these commercial things where it describes it as a world-class tutor, the same as a teacher. It's not the same as a teacher. It's not to say it's not very valuable. You can do good things. But I wish people would stop comparing, because I do think we should see what it is that the AI can do really well in that context. What does the people do really well, and make sure that we highlight that and then help educators prepare on that. One other thing that came to mind as you were talking with the concerns that people have when people start using technology to do things like, to be able to just, ask ChatGPT and hand that in as your assignment, and how do you get away from that, quote, cheating. What it reminded me of was having a conversation here at MIT, this must be maybe 20 years ago, when videos of classes were first starting to go online. And I was in a meeting where people said, this is a real problem. We put the videos online, and the students aren't showing up to classes anymore. And my reaction was, well, that means you should be doing something else in your classes. If they find those videos as useful as your classes, you shouldn't be running your classes that way. And I feel somewhat the same way with writing assignments. If you give a writing assignment that ChatGPT can do a good job on, that might not be the best writing assignment. And I thought it made me remember, I think I was in 3rd grade, and I handed in something. We had to do a biography of someone we admired. And I did just look up an encyclopedia entry, and I didn't copy it, but it was just a single source, and I did it. And there was a strong critique from the teacher about, you should make it more personal about why it is that you think that this person was important. And I thought that was really important, because that was something that wouldn't be automatically generated, but she was really asking me what it is that I found important about this, now that I relate it to my life. So there are ways that you can ask different things that I couldn't just do from the encyclopedia, or these days just ask ChatGPT.
Well, you could tell ChatGPT a few basic beliefs you have, and then ask it to generate your opinion on these things, which is sort of one of the problems that are coming up. Can I say one other thing which made me think of was just coming back to the idea that we're creating social environments, and this notion that what we should be doing with tutor bots is getting them to replace teaching functions because we don't have enough teachers, and sort of one-on-one. A question that some students and I came up with in class a few years ago, as I always really enjoyed, is what is the human-to-human interaction generated by a new technology? So when you add a technology to a learning environment, not what is the human-to-technology interaction that you generate, but how does that technology generate a human-to-human interaction? There's a great researcher at CMU named Carolyn Rosé who's worked on intelligent tutors for a long time. So it's extremely unlikely that you will come up with something that people have not worked on in the last 70 years. Since we've had computers the size of your living room, learning scientists and computer scientists have partnered to find all kinds of ways of getting computers to help teach people. And studying that history can be enormously helpful, because there's lots of ideas that we've already tried and things that we can learn from those ideas we've already tried. So for instance, Carolyn Rosé, who's been building tutor bots forever, very quickly lost interest in anything that interacted directly with a student. She was much more interested in tutor bots that you put in places where two people were already conversing with one another. It was basically an aid to help two people think more expansively, solve problems when they came up with shortcomings in their knowledge or other kinds of things like that. So that, I think, is a potentially really interesting way of using technology that will enhance social interactions rather than replace social interaction. And there's already a bunch of stuff that's written about it. And there's probably ways that generative AI can do it more easily or better or more creatively or other kinds of stuff. But there's a lot of fundamental thinking that's already out there.
So that's actually a perfect segue to think a little bit about how can we design the technologies to do things that are more in line with what we're trying to achieve in learning and education. And one of the things I've appreciated about both of you is that you're so thoughtful and sometimes critical of what's happening in technology, but at the same time, you are building technologies and you're tinkering with technologies and you're trying to use them in effective ways. So I wonder if you could both talk a little bit about what are your current activities. I know the Million Tutor Moves project. I know you're experimenting, Carmelo and others in your group are experimenting with how to integrate AI. So what are some ways that you're bringing this into your work?
Sure. Maybe I'll try to do it a bit in Mitch's framework. We'll just say, what is the learning goal that I have? So I'm really interested in how teachers learn. And I think one challenge that teachers have is they have insufficient opportunities to practice. So when teachers learn, they go to seminar rooms and talk about teaching, and they go into classrooms where 26 kids have to learn how to factor polynomials that day. And there's not really a practice field. So in my lab, we build technologies that create these simulations where teachers can rehearse for and reflect on important decisions in teaching. And we think there are interesting ways that generative AI can add value to those simulations. We're starting playing around with some feedback agents. So you say some stuff and some coaches predict the kinds of things that people might say, and they predict some things that might be useful to say, given people's responses, and then AI figures out how to match, novel responses to kind of pre-existing or modified pieces of feedback. That's been sort of fun to play around with. It's been particularly fun because we tried to do it a couple years ago with things like BERT and GPT-3, and it didn't really work. And now it seems to be working better, and so that's kind of fun. Another project that I have is there's a whole bunch of people who are interested in tutoring. An unusual thing about our education system is that we have very few machine-readable records of what teachers do. So we have terabytes, zillions and zillions of rows of data about what students do. We record students all the time. We don't record teachers nearly as well. So with some colleagues, I'm sort of organizing a group called the Million Tutor Moves project that would look at tutoring platforms and classroom recordings and would try to collect data about what it is that teachers do. A simple way to frame our hypothesis is that if you build a bunch of tutor bots on web scale data, they might not work very well because most of what happens on the web is that people answer questions. But actually what really good tutors do is question answers. And so we might need a different kind of data to be able to do that. Although I was just talking with someone who supervises lots and lots of tutors, and they've been doing some research on them. They said, one of the main things that effective tutors do is just keep students talking. They just say, keep going. What did you mean about that? You said something there. Keep going, keep going, keep going. And the reason why that works is that when a human being says to another human being, that was pretty good, keep going, say more about that, and then stops talking, there's this awkward silence. And the student is like, I really should keep talking just to fill this awkward silence. When a tutor bot says, that was pretty good, keep going, the student's going to be like, no, I don't want to keep going. You're a computer. I just told you what I know about it. Now you tell me. To me, it's just a great example of where our hopes for what text can be generated by machines or even voice can be generated by machines may be swamped by the fact that what people really want to do when they learn is to interact with other people.
Yeah. As I think about worthwhile things to work on, it all, as I was indicating before, it's all what can we do in the service of project-based, design-oriented, interest-driven collaborative learning. So always saying that's the goal and what can we do to help support that goal. And you do see examples of people using ChatGPT towards that goal. As they're working on projects, they use it as a resource. So I do think in the short term, there's a lot of things that can be done in the short term if we just help frame it, giving the learner control over using this. That is the same way that they look up things on Google online and they look at YouTube to get videos about when they're working on a project and an issue comes up and they're not quite sure how to deal with it, or they're not quite sure what to do. There are a lot of resources to use. Talk to another person is another one, and all of these are things we can do. There's an additional resource. It's a special type of new resource. So I think that's one thing that think trying to get people a better understanding of how they can make use of this new resource and balance it with its advantages and disadvantages over others. I guess I also have been thinking about in our group, as you know, we do a lot with developing programming languages for kids, and what's this going to mean for the future of programming languages and coding. A lot of people wonder whether it's going to sort of be the end of programming as we know it. And I do think it's important for us to be open to change, because we shouldn't hold on tightly to things just because we're familiar with it. So it's important to look at different things. And I do have colleagues who are starting to explore this space. Former student Eric Rosenbaum, who now works at the Scratch Foundation, is doing things of integrating some image generation tools inside Scratch, so that if you're right now, you could sort of look online to get an image, you do the library or use the paint editor, but also you should just be able to say you want an anime-style purple frog, and it generates it. Now, if your main goal of your activity was to learn how to draw a frog, that's not a good thing to do. But if your main activity is to make an animated story, that seems like a good thing to do. I think more ambitiously, I talked with my colleague Brian Silverman, who's been involved in development of LIGO and Scratch and other programming languages, and he's really very interested to explore this conversational interface, that we made a transition 20 years ago with Scratch and other things to a block, from text to blocks. And he's saying, well, maybe conversation is the next thing to be doing. Will we in the future just have a conversational interface? And for me, as I think about that, I do want to be open to it, but I also want to think carefully about what are the qualities that we appreciate in our current ways of doing things. So there's certain things that I really appreciate about the coding tools that we've built, coding environments, the ability that they provide people with the ability to create things that they really care about and to be able to refine their creations in a way that sort of matches what they want. For them to have a feeling of a sense of control and agency, so they're in control of it. Just their relationship with technology, I think it's important for young people to feel that it's not just something they're interacting with or giving something to them, but that relationship with technology is something we've always wanted. I think we want people to learn about the process and strategies of design, to go beyond coding, but how to break complex problems into simpler parts, how to iterate when you try something and iterate and refine it. Those are all things that are important to learn about the design process. And also, I think we always appreciate just, many people find joy in doing this, and I would hate for that to get lost. We do a lot of work with the LIGO company, and they have this phrase, joy of building, pride of creation. And I think a lot of kids, where they're building a castle with Lego bricks or an animated story with Scratch, do have a joy of building and a pride of creation when they share it. I don't want that to go away. And I do worry about that sometimes when people just use an image generation tool, and they don't feel like they really were the ones that created it. So there are a lot of these things that I don't want those things to go away. Or one thing we've already talked about is having kids think about their own thinking. And right now with writing programs as they are, I do think that as we investigate new approaches, like conversational approaches for telling the computer what to do, are there things that are being lost? Does it meet all of those criteria? And what my guess is, and I don't know, I think that's yet to be known, I think what's going to be challenging is, my guess is these new interfaces will meet some of those well and might even enhance it, and some of them they will degrade. And then it's a challenging thing because they'll make certain things easier and will remove some barriers, and other things we'll lose from that. And then how do we make decisions about what to support? But it's an ongoing process to get a better understanding of that.
And I think that's an ongoing conversation that hopefully we can have throughout the rest of this day. This half hour kind of flew by. I thought it was a great introduction to some of the ways to thinking about AI and learning and education. And I just want to remind myself also, we're sitting in the College of Computing. Many of the people in the room are building these tools or will be building these tools, will be applying them in creative ways, will be sharing how you're using them. And so, for me, what's special about MIT is always this tinkering, building things to explore what the future could look like. And it's Alan Kay's quote kind of summarizes it perfectly for me, which is the best way to predict the future is to create it or to invent it. And so I'm hoping that this conversation was maybe inspirational a little bit for all of you as you're thinking about how to bring this technology into teaching and learning, and looking forward to the rest of the day, and want to thank the two speakers for this fascinating conversation.
Thank you. Thank you.